Dear all, it's a pleasure to welcome to this webinar to launch a new suite of reports and brief on renewable energy policies for cities. Each passing day reminds us how urgent our mission is to put our economies on a more sustainable footing to avoid calamitous climate change. We have a very narrow window for taking action to accelerate the energy transition at all levels. But each day also brings more evidence that governments, companies, communities, and individuals are increasingly rising to the challenge. This is an all hand on deck challenge. Naturally, national government play a central role in steering society onto a pathway towards a cleaner and more just future. But cities are major population magnets and engines of the economy. And as such, they are major energy users and carbon emitters. They also find themselves on the front line of suffering the repercussion of an unsustainable and unequal energy system, be it in the form of energy poverty, air pollution, or increasingly climate disruption like storm, drought, heat wave, or sea level rise. And both contributors to the problem and laboratory of change, cities can and must be key actors on accelerating energy transitions. This is increasingly recognized among policymakers and translated into rising ambition and target setting, supportive legislation, and a multitude of enabling measures. Rapid change will be essential as growing urbanization magnify the scale of the challenge. In the next 30 years, urban populations are expected to grow by 2.5 billion residents. We need to reimagine our cities to achieve the decarbonization targets for improving the lives of all urban residents. Almost since its inception, IRENA has analyzed the different aspects of the urban energy transition challenge. We believe that the key building blocks for decarbonizing city are renewable energy and energy efficiency. Not only are renewables becoming even cheaper, but they can be customized to respond to particular local needs. A rich store of policy measures and practice has arisen. Over the years, we have published a number of studies and reports. They include technical assessment as well as planning tools. One such example is the Solar City Simulator, which is designed to evaluate the potential for rooftop solar PV at different scale in developed countries. We also have undertaken an array of city case studies around the world, and we have provided policies and analytical support for the urban energy transition in key sectors of the urban economy, such as the power generation, building, transport, and industry. The reports we launched today further expand our analytical work. They assess the different roles the city can play in the context of diverse socio-economic realities, diverging capacity, and governance context. This make for different experience and sets of lesson learned. But let there be no doubt, cities are central actors in our efforts to fight climate change. Their ambition and strategic vision will be major asset in our common struggle, especially in cities if cities collaborate with each other, engage with local stakeholders, and work closer with higher levels of government. Last but not least, we are thankful for the generous financial support from the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Natural Conservation and Nuclear Safety via the International Climate Initiative, ICI, who have enabled these studies. Again, welcome to this webinar, and I look forward to fruitful discussions. I now hand the floor to my colleagues for a presentation of the key findings, followed by a panel discussion with invited experts and practitioners. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, DG, for your kind introduction. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ulrike Lehr, the head of the Socioeconomic Policy Unit here at IRENA, and I'm your moderator today. Our urban policy team will now share some main findings from our new set of reports, available online also from today. First off will be Michael Renner, who is also part of the Socioeconomics Unit. He will be followed by Celia Garcia Baños, who is also part of the Socioeconomic Unit. And the presentation will be rounded out by Junlei Feng from the Renewable Energy Markets Policy Unit. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ulrike. So let's jump right to the first substantive slide, please. So as the Director General was saying, we are today publishing a set of reports that assess policies and experiences in promoting renewable energy in the urban context. So the core report, and you can see the cover image on the left-hand side of the slide, features an overall analytical approach, and it draws widely on examples from around the world. That report also includes city case studies from 3 countries, from China, Uganda, and Costa Rica. And those 3 case studies are actually also available as standalone reports. You can see the images on the right-hand side of the slide. In addition to that, we have 3 sectoral briefs, one on the power sector, on buildings, and on transport, shown in the middle. And I should also mention we are finalizing a set of related decision trees for municipal policymakers and other interested parties, which will be available soon online. Next slide, please. So I think it is without question that cities hold very special significance in the struggle to decarbonize the energy sector and to meet critical climate objectives. Cities are, and the DG had already mentioned this, cities are home to more than half the global population, and the share will only keep growing in coming years and decades. They are clearly engines of the economy. They are major energy consumers, and they are very big emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. But while that is true on one hand, on the other hand, they are really suffering more and more from the consequences of the present and sustainable energy system. And that those repercussions are really very clearly in evidence, whether that's in the form of air pollution or the increasing impacts from a change in climate. So I think it is very clear that cities can and they must be key actors in the energy transition through both technology and policy innovations. Now, we at IRENA argue that a holistic approach is needed, that it needs to be responsive to the different local realities around the world, that it recognizes the diverse social, economic, demographic, and environmental conditions in cities in different parts of the world. And that it really seeks to implement policies that allow all residents without fail, without exception, to benefit. Next slide, please. So this slide looks at 3 dimensions that set the stage for policymaking around promoting renewables in cities. So first, it gives an indication of the key drivers, which is to say the array of reasons and motivations why the cities ultimately decide to act. Beyond energy policies per se, there are key objectives that include economic development, job creation, social equity concerns, and of course, health and environmental considerations. But, and this is second, cities' actions are often shaped and sometimes constrained by a range of factors. Some of these are more difficult to change than others. If you think, for example, of a city's climate zone, right, it basically determines its heating or cooling needs. That is by and large unalterable, even in a changing climate. I mean, the fundamental facts are sort of set in place. Settlement structures and densities are difficult to change, at least in the short run, but they can be altered in the longer run. And then socioeconomic and demographic profiles are far more dynamic and malleable, at least over some years. In addition to these factors, we need to look at items like institutional capacities, at cities' technical know-how, at their regulatory authority, and also their ability to independently, autonomously generate revenues. Now, third, depending on both cities' motivations and their capacities, they can and they often do play a multitude of roles. In the first place, they are, of course, consumers of energy, and they can act to aggregate energy purchases on behalf of their residents. But they are sometimes also direct owners and operators of energy generating facilities. And they can, in addition, also facilitate the deployment of distributed renewable energy by both households and businesses. As planners, in this context, they can set local renewable energy targets. As regulators, they can develop building codes, enact solar ordinances, issue various technical standards, apply land use planning tools, and so on and so on. There's really a very rich range of tools available. And of course, finally, they can launch awareness campaigns among local residents. Next slide, please. So looking around the experiences and the actual actions taken, we see that policy approaches do vary, quite widely from country to country and from city to city. So cities that are taking actions to promote renewables often do so with diverging time horizons and with different levels of ambition. So for example, the targets that they establish can be either of a voluntary or a mandatory nature. The requirements that are being put in place may apply very broadly to more or less all urban sectors and actors, or they could be far more selective and more targeted. The effectiveness of municipal actions depends on a range of factors and circumstances. The local capacity to act, that is, to plan and implement policies, is really key. It is very important for cities to have effective collaboration with national governments or other higher level governments such as provincial and state governments, but to also locally to proactively engage with residents, with community groups, with businesses. And in addition to engage wherever that is feasible and suitable with different kinds of peer networks that have now arisen with other cities and with other suitable partners to share information, to pool resources, and to ultimately really compare lessons learned. What works, what can we draw, what lessons can we draw from what we have done so far. So it's quite clear that where municipal capacity and expertise are limited, this needs to be overcome. And in particular, greater funding and capacity building are essential to allow local efforts to succeed. Yeah, now we go to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide lists a few very selected policy tools that cities can and do wield in the power sector, in buildings, and in transport. And Celia will actually talk about more about this in just a moment. But let me just very briefly note, and I'm going to conclude then my portion of the presentation. It's not about renewable energy alone, right? Renewable energy needs to go hand in hand with enhanced energy efficiency, with demand-side flexibility, with electrification strategies. These are all really complementing and need to be complementing each other. And going beyond the energy policy sector as such, right, these measures can be far more effective if they then actually go hand in hand with broader policies. So they can be combined with efforts like land use policies and zoning rules to make the structure of cities more sustainable, with municipalization or re-municipalization of energy generation facilities to gain more direct control over energy decision making. Or another example is restrictions on vehicle use, particularly of vehicles that use internal combustion engines in urban cores. And we see actually more and more cities are doing that in many places, and Junlei will actually talk more about that as well. So I now give the floor to my colleague Celia, who will provide some highlights from our 3 sectoral briefs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Indeed, I'm going to give an overview. Michael has already started giving some of the insights, but we can say that the different roles of cities, they can also focus their efforts in the different sectors. So cities have, cities can take a lot of measures to promote renewable energy in the different sectors, starting for power generation. In this case, for example, cities can pursue centralized renewable energy solutions through solar street lighting, municipal solar rooftops, biogas from municipal landfills, etc. There are plenty of examples around the world. For example, in terms of solar PV Dubai is now implementing the solar plant at Dubai for around 40 megawatts. Seoul in the Republic of Korea has a goal to quintuplate rooftop PV from 200 megawatts to 1 gigawatt. Sydney in Australia is deploying thousands of street lights upgraded to solar power LED. And Milan, for example, in Italy is collecting food waste for biogas generation. An additional measure that cities can take is to support decentralized renewable energy solutions through net metering, net billing for residential and commercial solar rooftops and community energy initiatives. This is the case of Cape Town, for example, in South Africa, that with net metering and feed-in tariffs in place. Bangalore in India with an ambitious plan to increase the capacity of solar PV with net metering, or Fort Collins in the USA with community choice aggregation solar PV for low-income residents. Procure renewable energy supplies from private providers, local and beyond is another measure that cities can take over, like Boston in the USA with pooling demand from 20 cities for renewable energy, up to 5.7 terawatt hours. Strengthen or creating public utilities, remunicipalize assets, like the case of Hamburg in Germany, where remunicipalization invested in PV and wind. And of course, as Michael mentioned, in order to increase effectivity, participate in peer network, knowledge sharing, capacity building, like the cases of Global Covenant of Mayors or the Global District Energy in Cities initiative by ICLEI. In terms of an additional sector where cities have a key role is buildings. Cities can set standards like building codes, green ratings, permitting processes. For example, the city of Copenhagen in Denmark, they set a new low energy class ratings, and all new buildings are required to meet this demand. The case of integrate renewable energy into buildings through solar PV ready structures, solar heating and cooling ordinances, like the case of Barcelona, that was the first European city to pass a solar thermal ordinance in 2000, or Sao Paulo in Brazil, where they implemented an ordinance in solar water heaters. In both cases, these ordinances actually had an effect in inspiring many other cities, not only in their own countries, but in their regions. There's also a possibility to switch district heating and cooling systems to renewables through solar, geothermal, like the case of Reykjavik in Iceland, where 95% of the residents are connected to geothermal-based district heating network. Leverage social housing for renewals. That way there's a measure for social equity, like the case of Brazil with Minha Casa, Minha Vida program to install solar water heaters, or in Australia, Cairns to create affordable energy plan offers with no interest loans for public housing residents for solar rooftop PV. As in the case of power, there's also effectiveness can grow by partnering with local partners, with international peer networks, like the case of Rio in Brazil, where solar panels installed are daycare centers, a school, etc. Or Brixton in UK, where solar PV cooperatives were created, and it had a great impact in creating jobs, in creating and alleviating fuel poverty. And last but not least, the cities can have also a key role in the transport sector, and they can take over measures to promote renewable energy in this sector. For example, by switching from fossil fuels to renewables in their fleets, like biogas for buses, biofuel blendings for cars, or solar PV and wind for mass transit systems, like in the case of Linköping in Sweden, that in 2002, the bus fleet was converted to landfill methane, or the cases of Delhi in India, where the metro rail aims to have a 50 megawatt solar PV on the station roofs, or the case of Santiago, Chile, where the metro is soon to be sourced by 42% of the energy demands from PV and wind. There's also measures that can be taken for cities to create urban planning and using zoning tools to increase density and make renewable power public transit systems feasible. They can also restrict urban internal combustion engine cars from city centers. It can be something permanent, or it can be temporarily in case of the pollution is increased. The cases are all over the world, but Oslo, for example, in Norway, banned cars in the city center back in 2019. or Milan also tried to avoid congestion charges, applied congestion charges in city centers to prioritize cleaner vehicles. The cities can also support the adoptions of electric vehicles by implementing charging networks, creating mandates, enabling measures. This, of course, has more effect if already the energy mix is fully renewable energy, like my colleague Chongli will discuss later on the case of Costa Rica. But for example, in Pittsburgh, in the USA, they are aiming for fossil-free municipal car and motorcycle fleet by 2030. Electrifying bus fleets expands BRT systems, light rail and metros, like the cases of Shenzhen, China, with the world's first city to electrify the entire municipality bus fleet with over 15,000 buses. Or again, the city of Santiago, where they have a pioneer program to implement the regional e-bus that amounts to even 1/3 of all the e-buses in Latin America. And last but not least, again, it's critical to participate as a city in peer networks, knowledge sharing, capacity building, like the cases, for example, of Urban Electric Mobility Initiative or Zero Emissions Vehicle Network from C40 that I'm sure our panelists will mention later on. I want to give the floor now to my colleague Jinlei, who's gonna mention some of these measures that were taken over in the cases of China, Uganda, and Costa Rica. Thank you, Jinlei, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Besides the policy framework and sectoral briefs for cities to deploy renewables, the reports we are launching today also contain case studies in 3 countries, China, Uganda, and Costa Rica. Next slide, please. The case studies examine medium-sized cities, which will be the major driver of the global urbanization and the related energy consumption. They reflect the range of very different socioeconomic and demographic realities in cities around the world. Their diverse institutional and governance context makes for widely diverging sets of challenges and opportunities. And also, they provide different sets of lessons learned. For example, Chinese cities struggle to free themselves of codependence and associated air pollution. But for most Uganda cities, improving energy access is a key challenge. Costa Rica's power supplies are already mostly decarbonized with renewables. The next frontier is the electrification of transport, moving away from the polluting fossil fuels. Next slide, please. The selected Chinese cities are Chongli District and Tongli Town. Chongli District is located in northern China, while Tongli is close to Shanghai. As a background, China's energy consumption is dominated by coal. Renewables accounted for 12% of total final energy consumption and 38% of the capacity installation. The first city, Chongli District, needs space heating for almost 5 months. And also it's a destination for skiing and snowing activities. The city it belongs to will co-host the 2022 Winter Olympics and has been selected as a national renewable energy pilot city, both of which are key drivers for the city's commitments on renewables. The district has installed over 1.1 gigawatts of renewable capacity from onshore wind and a small share of solar PV. It targets to achieve 100 electric heating for urban buildings and also 100 renewable use for all the municipal-owned buildings. Tongli Town is another case. It's part of the Suzhou city. It's certificated as the World Heritage Site and one of the most popular tourism destinations in China. The local government's concern the increasing fire hazard from using fossil fuel for cooking and heating, they see electrification as a solution. Based on the derived renewable electricity, Tongli town has committed some renewable targets, including renewables to provide 20% of their total final energy consumption and almost 100% of the electricity system. Next slide, please. Uganda is a country with a young and rapid growing population. Only around 20% of the population has access to electricity, and around 2% they have access to clean cooking. So the national goal is to raise grid access to more than 80% by 2040 and to increase the share of renewable use. Uganda cities play a very important role in deployment of renewables. They can provide incentives, procure renewables, and own the projects. In one of the selected cities, Kasese, more than half of the urban households have no access to electricity. So firewood and charcoal are the largest source of energy supply. The Kasese district published its first renewable energy strategy, aiming for 100% clean household energy by 2020 and greater access to renewable energy services in cooking and lighting. In another city, Lugazi, around 37% of the households have access to electricity, but lack of financing and skilled local human resources is a challenge for the deployment. The district announced a plan to provide funds for infrastructure to promote the use of solar PV and biogas by 60% of the district population. Next slide, please. Costa Rica is a totally different case. This country has some 77% of its 5 million people living in urban area. And Costa Rica has achieved a large share of power generation sourced from renewable, more than 98% as of 2019, based on hydro, wind, and geothermal projects. The central government announced a National Decarbonization Plan 2050. The plan identifies transformation roles for each sector, including the electric mobility as a key solution for the transport sector. A number of stakeholders are involved in Costa Rica's electricity system, and the national utility, ICE, is a major player. And Cartago and Grecia and Guanacaste are among the pioneering cities. Cartago municipality initiated strategy to enable free EV charging stations and promote EV for municipal fleets, as some of the policy measures mentioned in the sector brief. And Grecia started with the citizen awareness campaign and also provide free parking for the electric vehicles in this city. The city of Guanacaste is Costa Rica's capital of renewable energy. It generates nearly 40% of the electricity for the whole country. This city is now encouraging consumers to switch to electric vehicles, and also it's promoting hydrogen vehicle, which is very meaningful in its context because it's already achieved almost 100% of renewable in the electricity. As Michael already mentioned a number of lessons learned from our case studies that cities have various roles to play to address the climate crisis and environmental issues through renewables. And electrification provides the great opportunity for end users. In particular, urban transport is critical in cities that already have a high share of renewable in the electricity mix, such as Costa Rica. Next slide, please. As you can see In the final slides, we have a broad range of policy analysis and case studies that examine experience around the world, inform policymakers on decarbonization pathways, and support the policymaking with technical tools. IRENA has remained committed to the topic of renewable energy for cities. Cities are the most important driver and player to address the climate crisis. Decarbonizing them and the urbanization process of cities with renewable will be critical to continue prosperity and achieve the global climate goals. Thank you very much. Now over to you, Ricky.
Thank you so much, colleagues. That was a very impressive presentation, also looking at cities from a lot of different angles. And here you see the panel that will, in short, be involved in a hopefully lively discussion, firstly among each other, and then we open the floor to questions from the chat. So in your presentation, you just introduced our most recent results, which of course can serve to provide a policy framework for municipalities and for the relevant policymakers. The framework also includes the role that municipalities can play, which aspects and local factors might be helpful, and what are the more or less low-hanging fruit for urban policymakers. That can be a landfill gas capture, that can be decentralized solar generation, maybe district heating and cooling, or all of it, and as we saw, or maybe electric vehicles for public transport, as has been introduced. As Celia mentioned in her remarks, we have developed sectoral briefs on power, on buildings, and on transport, also to support municipalities pursuing a renewable energy-based sustainable future. These policy briefs provide some general and structured recommendations supported by many city and country examples. And you saw the width of all the examples selected. And I think also our chat reflects the global relevance for renewables in cities, because I've seen messages popping up from pretty much all over the world. We also analyzed some best practices of cities in different contexts to identify and disseminate what might be useful and challenging. And it's always useful to learn from, let's say, good examples, but also lessons learned from some things that just didn't work out. Since 2013, we have developed a total of 19 city case studies. The most recent one have been just shown to you: China, Uganda, and Costa Rica. Jinlei shared that with you. And just as a spoiler, we will be also showing very brief teaser videos on each of these case studies. Longer versions of the video you can then find on our landing page. As we all notice, cities vary in their structures, in their needs, and in their opportunities. Some experience from Chinese cities are not applicable to, for instance, Costa Rica or Germany or any other country or any other city. We try to showcase or discuss this also in our panel. So for the panel discussion, we invited experts, researchers, and practitioners on the panel, and I will introduce them more elaborately or more comprehensively one by one as I address them. But just to name our illustrious panel, we have Constant Alasson. He's the program manager from C40. We have Rohit Zen, the head of climate energy actions at ICLEI, World Secretariat. We have Leah Ranalda, program manager and analyst from REN22, and Niken Arundhati, the head of the Renewable Energy Development, Energy and Mineral Resources Agency of the West Nusa Tenggara province in Indonesia. Now turning to Constant. Constant, you are program manager for clean energy at C40. You support cities to plan and implement actions to decarbonize electricity, heating and cooling in line with their respective climate action plans. You started your career working for various French environmental public institutions after you obtained a Master of Science in Public Affairs from Sciences Po Paris and a Master of Science in Environmental Technology from Imperial College London. C40, as I think most of our auditorium knows, is a network of the world's megacities committed to addressing climate change, currently grouping 97 of them, accounting for 1/4 of the global GDP. C40 is supporting these cities for sustainable actions and addressing climate change. Now, the question to you, Constant. We see some megacities have announced or are planning to achieve carbon neutrality. The targets, like the target years, differ, but the target is quite clear. Could you share with us your point of view on how renewables could support the goal of carbon neutrality, in particular in megacities? And could you give us some examples? Looking forward to your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrike, and thank you very much for having me. I think this is a very exciting event today. And, you know, I think for too long, cities have been left out a little bit of the energy transition kind of global debate. Of course, they've been involved in conversations about how to decarbonize mobility and buildings, but it's more holistic conversation about how to transition the energy system as a whole has kind of, you know, not really happened with cities in mind. So it's great to see IRENA, but many other organizations trying to make this debate much more, you know, frontline and put cities at the forefront of the energy transition. As you mentioned, C40 is a network of the world's megacities committed to tackle climate change. And after the Paris Agreement, we decided to launch a program called Deadline 2020, which is basically a commitment from the world's leading cities to urgently pursue high ambition on climate action and demonstrate how the Paris Agreement can actually be delivered. Cities signing up to the Deadline 2020 program commit to develop a climate action plan compliant with the Paris Agreement, and that means compliant with the targets of 1.5 degrees. So, you know, very early on, we decided to go after the highest level of ambition because we know our cities can deliver that, and we know they've got the ambition to deliver that. To date, we've had about 50 cities that have already published their Paris compliant climate action plan. I invite you to have a look at our website to see what those cities are and navigate, you know, have a look at the climate action plan. They're very exciting. We developed quite an intense framework, I should say, for cities to develop those plans to make sure they're really credible and they enable cities to tackle the biggest sources of emissions. And many more of those plans will follow in the next few weeks. Really renewable energy and combined with energy efficiency and the energy sector overall is absolutely central to those plans. You know, we knew that because we've done some research showing that to stay on a 1.5 degree trajectory, all cities needed to decarbonize the grid, but also beyond that, showing that cities can save over 2 gigatons of CO2 equivalent by 2050 with actions such as building scale and district level clean energy deployment. Of course, beyond GHG emissions, cities understand very clearly that renewable energy can help with strengthening equity and social justice, improving people's health by reducing health pollution, but also increasing the resilience of those cities and overall just building more inclusive and equitable cities, providing a new way of bringing people that are away of electricity and energy markets today towards universal energy access. So again, you know, having this holistic approach to the energy sector is really important, and that's something that we encourage all cities to do. So what do we see in those plans? I think what is interesting is that some of the narrative of the presentation that we've heard today around the diversity of approaches and actions that cities can take, that's really reflected in the climate action plans. And I think it's a very encouraging signal and a call to action to all cities to say, wherever you are, whatever your regulatory framework is, whatever your climate context is, there is something you can do in your city to accelerate the energy transition and decarbonize the energy sector. Of course, adopting targets and roadmaps, we know how important it is to kind of provide a direction of travel, align incentives, and bring with you citizens, businesses, and other stakeholders. Durban or Etequini in South Africa adopting a target for 100% renewable electricity by 2050, such an inspiring thing to do for a city located in a country that massively relies on coal still today. But also a city like London that you might not particularly associate with the sun, having a target of deploying 2 gigawatts of solar by 2050. Los Angeles, with the local utility, just announced that they're bringing forward their 100% renewable, or the 100% clean electricity target to 2035. Cities also directly invest in deployment, leveraging municipal assets and resources. We see it in Mexico City, we see it in Curitiba, in Brazil, collaborating with the local utility to build a solar and biomass plant in a disused landfill. We see it everywhere in North America with cities signing power purchase agreements for their municipal consumptions. Obviously, taking action to facilitate the deployment of renewables in the private sector through incentives, tax incentives, or feed-in tariffs, such as in Seoul. But also something very interesting is cities understanding the need for collaboration and to work with others, and acknowledging that in the climate action plan. A good example is Melbourne. One of the key actions they're taking is advocate very actively at the national level for more ambitious renewable targets, but also collaborate with others to accelerate the divestment movement. There's many, many more, building codes, retrofitting district energy system, looking at mobility as well. We've heard a lot of examples today already. I think the last thing I wanted to say is that the 10 next year, the climate decade, will be shaped by our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So making sure we prioritize renewables in stimulus packages is so important. But also, we're talking here about how renewables are critical for cities to decarbonize. I'd like to switch the argument a little bit and remind people that cities have proven that they're able to deliver on climate. And cities can have a very important role in accelerating the energy transition at large. So, it's a bit of a call to other stakeholders, to national governments and other actors on the energy value chain to say, you need to talk to cities. You need to have cities in mind when you're thinking about the energy system of the future, because cities can be central in a system that is based on distributed, decentralized, decarbonized renewables. And you really need to bring them on board. They can help you to achieve our broader objectives of decarbonizing energy systems in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement.
Thank you. That was a very flaming speech for the importance of city. But as our DG has already pointed out, cities provide somehow the magnifying glass through which a lot of the aspects that are needed for the energy transition to actually work and succeed are boiled down and focused on. Like, you mentioned resilience, you mentioned collaboration, and I think cities also just affect the way we are thinking, because as most of us are living in cities, and if we notice there the transition towards a much better climate-friendly pathway, I think that also creates our support and acceptance. China is one of the countries that is known for having a lot of mega cities, and I've been promising you videos. I would like to invite my colleagues to start with the first video, which is on China. Thank you. I think we had a small sound problem here, but you will find all the videos on our landing page and even longer versions of that too. We are also, maybe if you experienced a little bit jumpiness in the videos, I think meanwhile, after 1.5 years of COVID, everybody is used to very different bandwidth and accessibilities. But as I said, you'll find this video and also the next 2 videos on our landing page. But now I'm turning to our next panelist, Rohit Sen. Rohit is head of Climate and Energy Action Team at ICLEI, the World Secretariat. He coordinates and manages all activities related to renewable energy and climate action. He holds a mechanical engineering degree from India and 2 master's degrees in renewable energy technology and energy management from Scotland and Germany, respectively. And I think now you're currently based in Bonn. ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a global network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. Deployment of renewable energy solutions in urban power, in buildings and in transport is vital for cities to achieve sustainable development. But Rohit, in the question that I have for you, I would like to address the fact that there is a lot of urban areas in the world that lack adequate connection to the grid. Or actually, there's also a lot of urban areas in the world that are connected to the grid, but lack adequate power to be obtained from the grid. So could you share with us what you see as the key drivers and barriers for renewable energy solutions in these said areas addressing this problem? Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Ulrike. And I think some of those points were very well summarized by even Michael in his presentation, and also Constant touched upon a few points. But yes, there are different drivers that are there for different cities and regions. I mean, to mention a few, you can look at cities having their own decentralized solutions based on renewable energy that gives them security of supply, and also increases the community resilience, also having the access to energy. Other than that, the second driver could be the reduction of CO2 emissions, which enhances climate protection. Third, I would say generating revenues from maybe sale of renewable energy if the grid comes and connects to that region in the future, or if there's already a grid connection existing to that region or the city. Another driver is reduction in fossil fuel use. So this definitely impacts the air quality, reduces air pollution, and also associates with health risks. So direct, indirect benefits of health as well. I also see that creating jobs, boosting the local economy is another driver that would lead the cities to get into renewables and look at this energy transition. And one last driver, but not the least, I would mention that it also enhances a bottom-up approach towards achieving the NDCs, the national and local plans that they have, whether it is overarching or sectoral plans. Speaking of some barriers that I see from my side, also working currently on our flagship project at ICLEI for 100% renewable cities and regions, which is also funded by ICI, the German, via the German government, is that we see that there is a lot of lack of data available on the ground with local authorities, with cities and all. And this is not just with respect to generation data, resource data, but also land use data. A lot of times, GIS mapping, resource data are not there, and spatial plannings are not done. So these are certain things that, of course, act as a barrier. Apart from that, there is a lot of need to do capacity building and training with respect to the local authorities planning and developing projects and programs of renewable energy and transitioning towards that status. I mean, this is, of course, not added to the fact that there is lack of access to finance, which is also a big barrier, and something that we need to see how to empower the cities and regions. How can they access finance nationally, locally, also internationally? So therefore, policy would be something very important to look at, and how the national governments can empower the local governments in this case. Apart from that, I also see that one of the biggest challenge is that sometimes, and this depends on cities and regions in different parts of the world, mostly in the global south, that the generation of power is not always under the role or command of the cities or the local governments. And that is something that would definitely enable them and empower them in meeting such goals and ambitions, and moving or transitioning towards net zero, or meeting all the goals with 2030 SDGs. So yeah, and these are certain things that we are also looking at in our own projects with respect to various cities that we are working on in different countries in Global South. You mentioned regions which are not connected to the grid. So there I see one of the biggest interventions of policy should be that if today the local governments, the cities go ahead with decentralized power generation based on renewables, what happens when tomorrow the government decides to connect that region or the city with the grid? So would there be policies to take in those decentralized power generation units or assets into and connect with the national grid? Would there be policies like feed-in tariffs or net metering that would enhance further revenue generation and promote more private sector and public sector to build further decentralized power generation? So those are certain things that I see as barriers and drivers with cities at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Also, a lot of various and very, very different aspects. I mean, we from IRENA, of course, like to hear that one of the drivers is jobs, because we've done a lot of work on jobs that are connected with renewable energy deployment, also on the possibilities of leveraging on existing structures, the job creation, also the lack of data. We are trying to mitigate that a little bit with our works, the works that we are launching today, but also the other works we've been doing on city. I find your point really interesting in the decentralized aspect, and then what do we do if the grid comes along in those areas which have not been attached to the grid. So maybe we come back to that either through the question and answers also in the chat, or through a more general panel discussion later on. Speaking about the chat, I invite all our participants, please write questions either to the presenters from IRENA or to our panelists into the chat. They will be collected by my colleagues, and then I can introduce them into the general panel discussion. And with this, I would like to treat you with the second video from this time from Uganda, addressing the fact or the situation where adequate connection to the grid is lacking. Video, the floor is yours. This time with sound, please.
The solar project started in 2012. That's when we started looking at how to utilize the sunshine we have in Kasese. People are always hungry for development. So if you really come in and say this is what we bring development, people will grab with the just.
Thank you. I'm happy we had the sound with the nice music also on the videos. And with this, I would like to turn to our next panelist. Let me introduce you Leah Ranalda. She is a project manager and analyst at REN21, the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st century. She coordinates the research on the renewables in cities global status report. Leah holds a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Lund University. REN21, as most of our audience might be familiar with, is a global renewable energy community of actors from science, governments, NGOs, and industry. REN21's Renewables in Cities Global Status Report series provides an overview of the status and trends and development of renewable energy targeted exactly to cities. The 2021 edition was just launched recently, so I allow a small advertising break to you, Leah, too. One of the findings is that around a quarter of global urban residents live in a city with a renewables target or with a renewables policy already in place. Leah, I have a tricky question for you because many people think, and I think I'm among them, that a key way to reduce transport emissions is to move to do something regarding vehicles, be it move to more public transport, be it change completely our behavior, or moving to electric vehicles also on an individual level. So can you share with us how a city can make sure that if we switch to electric vehicles, that we can decarbonize public transport through renewables? Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ulrike, and thanks for that lovely introduction and already the promotion on our report. You took that already away from me, which is absolutely fantastic, so I can focus on answering your question. First of all, completely agree with your assessment that we do need to look at the transport sector. I think overall, if we look at the energy transition, there's always a lot of focus on electricity. We hear about these record installations and record low prices, but of course, all of this, the majority of this is speaking about renewable electricity, which is of course only a small part of what we need to go to a system-wide energy transformation. I think we do see a fantastic momentum going towards electrification of the transport sector, but I first of all want to make a point, and I think Michael already also touched upon this in his presentation, is we need to speak about also reducing the demand and also reducing the demand for transport, but because a clean traffic jam is still a traffic jam. I think there have been many people saying this, but so it's really about not only moving to replacing every single fossil fuel vehicle with an electric vehicle, because then we're still going to sit in a traffic jam. And I think it's about, as Rohit has said, as Constant has said, it's about creating these livable, healthy cities. So that of course also means cities where you can walk, where you can bike, where you have good public transport. So reducing energy demand, improving public transport, and also then shifting this public transport to renewable-based solutions is of course absolutely key in this entire discussion of how we talk about the transport sector. And then speaking about this electrification of the transport sector, I see that there is a fantastic momentum. Let's be honest, it is still very minor if we look into the big picture of what is needed. So there's definitely also a necessity to accelerate the shift to renewables there. And I think also when we speak about electrification, the big question is always, where does the electricity come from? If we have an absolutely coal-fired power system and we put some electric buses in there, that does not necessarily mean that these electric buses are then clean. So I think speaking about where does the electricity come from is a really, really important question. And I mean, of course, there's a move towards towards greener, more renewables grids, and electrified transport can, of course, benefit from that. And we've also, I mean, as Constant already said, there's many cities that have these targets for renewable energy. And also we see some cities that have specific targets for renewable-based transport or electrified transport. And of course, cities also benefit from a rising share of renewables in the grid. But what I find really inspiring is to see that there's also several cities that are taking this challenge upon themselves and say, okay, we put electric vehicles in there in our public transport fleets, but we also think about how we charge them. So for example, if you look at Portland, there's now new buses that will be added, and they will be powered 100% by wind energy. And I find these examples really important and really inspiring to hear. So also to understand that cities have a role to link these two sectors together, and thinking about where the electricity comes from. And I think this then also goes back to the roles and the roles that cities play in a bit more general, which is we speak about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and then the role that the city has as a policymaker is, as I said, where does the electricity come from? And then there is an opportunity for the city government to get for their own municipal infrastructure, but also to get private actors and businesses and communities to charge their electric vehicles with renewables power. And there's some really encouraging examples of municipal governments putting in building codes to make new buildings not only EV ready, but also solar ready. So to say, to make sure that electric vehicle infrastructure that is or new buildings that are being built have electric vehicle charging infrastructure that is powered by renewables. So really city governments using their role here as policymakers to make sure that there is this link between renewable, energy and then transport. And I think while we do have this momentum for electrification, let's also not forget that the majority of renewable energy transport is still biofuels, and that there's also lots of encouraging examples at the city level, really linking household waste and then linking this to local production of biofuels, which of course, as Rohit already said, is an opportunity to create local jobs, but also this entire tackling the transport sector is, of course, also a massive opportunity to talk about and tackle air pollution. And with that, back to you, Ulrike. Thank you.
Wow, very enthusiastic also. That is really, really, really nice and very inspiring. Now, we have one example in our third video from Costa Rica, which is actually has gone rather far already in electrifying transport and also renewabilizing the electrified transport. Video, the floor is yours.
Costa Rica, la matriz eléctrica es casi 100% renovable, entonces estamos usando electricidad producida en Costa Rica, es decir, no importada, y que es renovable con el medio ambiente, y somos de los pocos países en el mundo que tienen esta ventaja. El impacto de la movilidad eléctrica en Costa Rica es muy amplio. Hoy los puntos de recarga inundan el país y empezar a ver una infraestructura muy interesante alrededor de la vida cotidiana de las personas. Eso es lo que hace finalmente el cambio, que la gente lo siente cerca y lo empieza a experimentar.
Podemos lograr como sociedad dejar una mejor huella de carbono a nivel mundial. Es un cambio generacional viable totalmente.
Encouraging, isn't it? Yes, and with this, I turn to our next panelist, which is more from the really policy maker, decision maker side. Niken Arundhati is head of the renewable energy development at okay, at Energy and Mineral Resources Agency of West Nusa Tenggara province in Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest energy consumer in Southeast Asia. And there are forecasts that say that electricity demand could triple before 2030. Rising energy needs, for instance, for cooling, are part of the reason of this expected surge in energy use. And if and when the tourists come back, they will definitely come back to West Nusa Tenggara province. I already have been there, fortunately, pre-COVID. And it's one among the pioneering regions and cities seeking a renewable energy-based future. So, Niken, could you please share with us the targets and the plans of West Nusa Tenggara province for a renewable energy-based future? And maybe you could also share your thoughts on the main challenges to achieve these targets. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ulrike, and thank you for having me. In Regional Energy Plan, we expected to reach minimum 23% by 2025. However, at the moment, assisted by ICLEI, we are aiming at even higher target. We've just finished the energy planning with a more ambitious target, which is 100% renewable energy by 2050. And according to this energy planning, this target will be fulfilled by the local renewable energy potential, which will even make West Nusa Tenggara province more self-sufficient in terms of energy in the future. The electricity generations, also cooling demand, will be fulfilled by the electricity from the biomass, since we have abundant potential of it, comes from the agricultural waste and also the residential waste. And the electricity generation also comes from the wind, solar power, and hydropower, and small part of geothermal. Meanwhile, in the transportation sector, the fossil fuel-based vehicle will be replaced by the electric vehicles and also the hydrogen fuel. As for the challenges, generally it can be seen from three different aspects, which are the policy, finance, and also the technical. From the policy aspects, it is important to maintain the consistency of the planning to keep the renewable energy development priority. Also, to keep the regional energy plan in line with other document of planning from different sector and also from different institutions to avoid the overlap during the implementations. Meanwhile, from the finance aspect, is how to implement this ambitious target within limited government budget. Currently, the central government has been encouraging us, the local government, to explore other financing schemes such as the public-private partnership and also green bonds to develop the renewable energy. However, since these things are still new to us, the local government, so we need further assistance either from the central government or from the other stakeholder. And last, from the technical aspect, is how to overcome the intermittency issue, which is considered can disrupt the reliability of electricity supply to the consumer, which is caused by several types of renewable energy power plants such as wind and also solar.
Yes, thank you, Niken. I think you pointed out something very relevant for cities wherever they are, which is the adjusting the different planning processes. So you have planning processes at a, let's say, country level, at a regional level, and then at a local or city level. And it is really important not to have any contradicting or conflicting issues there, which could then really lead to some confusion and also some really big inefficiencies. I think we have time to go to our second round of questions. And I would like to start where I began. So that goes again to Constant. Constant, we are working on pathways we as IRENA are working on pathways to the 1.5 degree world, under which renewables play a key role. So in your view, what is the most critical challenge for the mega cities to achieve zero emission? And mind you, for the second round, we have roughly, the better part of 10 minutes. So please be brief.
Sure.
Constant, question clear. Not only you, of course, everybody. Question clear?
Question very clear. Answer
right,
a bit more complicated. I think that there are many challenges. I mean, Rohit has spoken about some of the barriers and some of the key challenges have come up. I would say the need to think at the system level in the holistic way is, as we know, very necessary, but quite challenging, especially at the city level, especially on energy questions where capacity might be a little bit more limited because the energy system so far has been developed in such a centralized way. So kind of having this shift in thinking and really going to the system level is a difficult one. I think the discussion you were having with Leah about transport is a good example of that. You know, the hierarchy of approaches between avoid, shift, and improve. You know, you can go even one step further and say, you know, it's about urban planning and how do you build a 15-minute neighborhood or 15-minute cities where everything you need to live well in a city is located within walking or cycling distance. So I think that's one of the key challenges, this kind of shift in thinking at the system level. And the other one is the need for collaboration. Cities won't be able to achieve their objectives on their own. They will need to work with national government, as again, it was mentioned a few times, but also other cities and other stakeholders along the energy value chain. And that makes, as we all know, collaboration makes everything a little bit more complicated, at least in the short term. So those two aspects of the need for change at scale, collaboration and system thinking, I think are what is the strength of what cities can do and what is really necessary, but definitely also a bit of a challenge in terms of implementation. But hopefully organizations like ourselves, IRENA, other cities networks can help to make that happen in a way that enables cities to meet their climate action plan objectives.
Yeah, collaboration makes things always a little bit more complicated and also a little bit slower. But in the end, then you have at least a solution that is supported by many, which is the good part of it, basically. Yeah, thank you. For Rohit, we know that many cities face challenges such as insufficient local financial resources. So we turn to one of the elephants in the room, which is always money. Can you give some recommendations on how that kind of cities with limited available resources can also target the 100% renewables future? Rohit, any ideas?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Ulrike. I think this is, as you said, elephant in the room, big question, and always comes up in all sorts of discussions, access to finance for renewable energy and moving towards, let's say, 100% renewables. I mean, I'll be brief to save time, and I've also copied for everyone some links that they can look at. I mean, looking at cities, internal or own sources, one can look at from which other projects or activities they can raise revenues to then finance renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects. They can also look at their assets, land, how they are using it. Is there any ways to generate revenues from leasing or sale of land assets? Apart from that, I think if they look at outside as local private sector or national private sector or international private sector, can they raise equity? Can they raise finance through taking loans? Again, that would also reflect on the policy that they have. Sometimes cities and subnational governments or regions are not allowed to take debt or equity directly from international sources or private companies and so on. Cities can also look into innovative ways of financing various mechanisms and instruments, whether it is green bonds by the municipalities. They can also look at crowdfunding, something they can do locally, regionally, nationally, also internationally, in forms of debt, which would come as loans or completely grant or donation finance. So some of them I just wanted to highlight. There are ways. One needs to be innovative and see how they can take the first initial steps, because once you put your foot in the door and things are really working out and the results are showing up, you will attract more investors, more interest from other parties, other stakeholders who will try to come in and be part of this transition. I have put the link to ICLAI's Transformative Actions program, which also has various tools and resources which the cities and subnational governments can use. One of them is that finance decision-making tree, which is as simple as it can be. Look at questions and whether you have resources, which other stakeholders can you look at. So, and also for more information, I've also put the link for ICLAI's flagship project on 100% renewables. Thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think that is very useful for our auditorium also. I assume that also, given the possibilities of ownership for renewable energy facilities, I mean, even cities could generate some revenue stream by, I don't know, be it selling electricity or otherwise, just from having ownership of this, of these systems. Although somebody else in this panel already mentioned that exactly this ownership of that, that this ownership could be also one of the bottlenecks and the difficulties by cities to actually decide on their electricity generation or generation of heating and cooling. Mentioning heating and cooling, I turn now to Leah for her second question. Now, heating and cooling accounted for almost half of the global total final energy consumption in 2018. It still, however, it's somehow very, very stubborn. It remains one of the most difficult sectors to decarbonize. So in your view, is there any unique roles that cities can play to accelerate the decarbonization of heating and cooling? Can you give some examples?
Thank you,
Leah?
Yes, yet another very difficult question, which I'm glad to take on, because I think just like transport, it is also a really big elephant in the room. As you said, more than half of our demand comes from heating and cooling, so there's really a need to tackle that. And a lot of the demand comes from buildings, and buildings, the majority of them are in and around cities. So I think already here, there's a quite logical role that city governments can play. And also, if we think about heating and cooling, the markets are quite fragmented and local. So there is an opportunity here to create these local markets, just also to start with. And I think if you say different roles that cities can play, first, I think target setters. I think you have mentioned it, also many other organizations have mentioned it. Most of the targets are for the power sectors. There are a couple of cities that are taking on the challenge and are also submitting targets for heating and cooling, thinking about how they can decarbonize their district energy systems. And as well, there is this massive momentum for net zero targets. And of course, I think it's also now well understood that if you have a net zero target, you also have to think about how to decarbonize your heating and cooling and your transport. So I think this also offers a massive opportunity for integrating more renewables in heating. So targets, then having cities leading by example. So thinking about how they can use their rooftop, how they can use their rooftop for standalone systems, for solar water heaters, for solar thermal, for also heat pumps, renewable based heat pumps. And we've seen some cities thinking about this and taking a lead, which of course is not only important for decarbonizing their own energy supply, but also this important aspect of raising awareness and leading examples and showing others how to do it. And then also thinking about if they have a district energy system, working with partners, working with utilities to decarbonize the district energy systems. And I think we've seen, for example, Lyon now installing a biomass plant for connecting it to their network. There is a massive push for solar fields being connected to district energy. For geothermal, there's now a big project underway in Munich. So I think there are opportunities. And then as a last thing is also cities using their regulatory power, the policy making power, and thinking about what they can do to get the people, the communities, the businesses in their city to also shift to more renewable based heating and cooling solutions. So we've seen this rise of building codes specifically for new buildings. I think it was mentioned before in the presentations, Barcelona as an example is really a front runner here to set a building code, which then inspired not only other Spanish cities, but also the national government to take action, which is of course exactly what we want. But then also some cities thinking about providing financial and fiscal incentives. So to say, if you put a solar thermal system on your rooftop, we give you some money, which of course is a really important step. And then we have also seen this rising movement of bans and restrictions on fossil fuel heating and cooking that's now coming up, which of course also opens up the door for more renewable-based heating solutions. And I think just again, we have to think about that heating is also a major source of air pollution. So shifting to renewables in heating, also reducing the demand for heating, is just absolutely key to also tackle the air pollution problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I myself have been working in energy efficiency also for years and years and years, and it is a stubborn question. So it somehow, there hasn't been as much movement as we have been observing in renewable energy, that's for sure. Somehow it's not as interesting or as tempting for the bright engineers. Seems to me that that is one of the hampering factors too. Now, turning to Niken and to the example from your province, could you share with us an experience from your province that could be duplicated by other cities or by other regions for that matter, to head jointly towards the 100% renewable energy future?
Thank you, Ulrike. I think nowadays people are becoming more aware of the importance of renewable energy utilizations, and that would be include the local government, either the municipality and also the regency government. But we have a very limited government budget. So one way to overcome this, I will tell you two examples. One is from the northern part of Lombok and Mataram City. Mataram is the capital of West Nusa Tenggara province. So the local government have been developing the small-scale biogas that utilizes the organic waste. And this is done by implementing the sharing budget between the local government, an NGO called HIFOS, and also the users to overcome the limited government budget. So beside the sharing budget, they also sharing the responsibility. So by doing this, they can provide a reliable after-sale service to the users and also can provide the training to the users. So the other benefit is, since the users are involved from the start or since the planning stage, so the ownership senses is growing, so they feel more responsible to look after the biogas plant and make it more sustainable. And the other example is currently the provincial government of West Nusa Tenggara involves the small enterprises to produce the electric bike. Because since the COVID-19 pandemic, the government restricts mobility and also the outdoor activities. But in other hand, the interest of people or public for baking is growing rapidly. So the provincial government, along with the local small enterprises, took the chance, take this momentum to recover the local economy by producing the electric bike and also by promoting this clean or more health energy lifestyle to the public.
Very interesting. An electric bike strategy. Yeah, that is a pretty interesting example. So thank you, dear panelists. And now I turn to our chat and to our auditorium and try to address some of the questions that we have been finding in the chat and that have not been yet answered by my colleagues. So there is a question to Rohit that I find. The question is, which cities is the German government funding on renewable energy? Because you've been mentioning also IKE, I think. And is any city in India among them? Rohit, you want to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it would be very difficult to pinpoint all the funding from the German government. The German government is funding so much around the world, both through different ministries as well, the BMU and the BMZ. But yeah, I mean, I can say, for example, the project that IGLE has from the German government, in that we are looking at 9 cities in Indonesia, Argentina, and Kenya. So 3 cities in each of those countries. If the question is whether German government is funding through IKEs or some other projects in India, there is information on the website that you can look at. There are previous existing projects, and I feel that even you can look at GIZ, because of late I heard that GIZ had a call for a proposal where they wanted to have this renewable energy cities in India, or calling them solar cities. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can answer your questions directly to the full satisfaction, but nevertheless, please look at this website. But nevertheless, I must mention that this transition towards 100% renewable cities and regions is moving very strongly, because now you see that at national level, so many countries, so many regions, including the European Union, have now moved and made commitments towards net zero by 2050. And for that, having a 100% renewables target or commitment forms one of the main pillars, because without that, it will be very difficult to achieve such ambitious targets. No? So as I said, not only in India, but in many other countries, cities, subnational regions, they are looking at how to transition towards 100% renewables. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There is a new question. Celia mentioning cooling and heating. No, not from Celia, but she collected it. Mentioning cooling and heating. Some cities can use excessive amount of electricity by renewable energy in cooling or heating. However, many cities are not ready in terms of infrastructure to use district cooling and heating. So this is more a question, and I think this would be one of the last questions across the panel. One final sentence regarding that. How do we improve and enhance the resilience of the infrastructure in cities to make more room for renewable energy based cooling and heating, for instance? Who wants to start? We start as we did, everybody one sentence. That would start with Constant.
There's a lot in the question. I think the important thing is to say that cities, because they're close to residents, because they know very well local energy consumption, can help with increased amount of renewables by strengthening flexibility in the grid, either by enhancing battery storage or by helping with some of the behavioral change that we need to see to help align the consumption curve with the production curve, as well as facilitating things like mini grids, for example, or virtual power plants or peer-to-peer trading of electricity to enable this flexibility on the grid. In 30 seconds, that's what I would say, but there's much more in the question.
Great, very good use of 30 seconds. Rohit, your 30 seconds.
I mean, I would just add one point that decentralization is the way forward to create more resilience in renewable energy assets. This is not just with respect to cities and regions, but in general overall, also in areas which are prone to natural disasters. And so definitely we must look at how to bring more resilience into our renewable energy assets. And by decentralization is my point on that.
Yeah, thank you. Leah, you have thoughts on this?
I would say, I think, first of all, every city is different. So also to think about how can you make use of your city environment, think about, okay, standalone systems work in more densely populated cities. Not every city can put in a district energy system from day one. I think there is a necessity to think about urban planning, and then also to think about which renewable energy solutions can provide, can be provided. Not every city has lots of sun, but then maybe wind potential or is close to an ocean. So I think to think about the variety of options that are available, and think about integrated solutions and how they can be interlinked, how the different sectors can be interlinked, because as Rohit already said, decentralization is an opportunity for air pollution, jobs, and much more.
Niken, you want to briefly share your thoughts on that regarding the infrastructure needed?
Yes, maybe I would say from my perspective as the policymaker in local government. So I would say that the good energy policy and also good energy plan is very important, and these policies should be integrated and in line with other planning document, and follow up by the fixed funding from the government to keep the renewable energy development priority.
Thank you. There's one more tiny question that I would like to throw at Constant, actually, because you have been managing cooperation. The question reads, from a business perspective, how can we use the importance of policies when we approach residents, commercial, public space, and other businesses inside a city? Ready to take that?
I can try. Well, I would say, business have an important role to play as well in showing that they support progressive policies for renewables. So I would say, talk to cities, try to learn about what they need, and try to align your business interests with what they see as necessary to increase the energy transition at the local level. As Leah said, every city is different, so don't assume what you know about one city will be the same in another one. Have an open dialogue, and then use your advocacy power to support those objectives and to align your ambition with that of the cities.
Thank you. That was very, very helpful and very, very useful. I think now let me try to wrap up and highlight the most important points in 2 sentences. What I learned from the panel and also from the presentations is there's a lot of different motives driving cities to turn to 100% renewable energy, climate change definitely not being the last among these, but there's more. Leah said we want to live in livable, healthy cities. And I think that was a very, very good summary that catches a lot of the aspects that everybody on the panel and also in the presentations has been mentioning. And of course, we need a very varied policy and very tailored policy framework to make livable, healthy cities out of the respective cities in different countries and facing different challenges. And with this, I think the only thing that remains is thanking you for your answers, your participation, your creativity, thanking my colleagues for excellent presentations, and thanking whoever did the videos for providing really nice illustrations and examples, because I think this type of pictures and videos also are a really nice take-home message that, you know, enriches and inspires our fantasy and creativity. Thanks a lot to everybody.